All right, guys. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Hopefully, this is you're able to celebrate in your own homes, socially distanced, but you can at least wear green and make your coffee Irish if possible. So this is my first series video. I'm going to try and keep these really short. I really am hoping to help inform you guys, get information out there to a broader audience, and hopefully clarify things or at least give you my opinion of things going forward. And I hope that that allows you to make your own decisions and you feel more informed and you feel like you have a better understanding of the situation as well as things are changing on a day-to-day basis. With that being said, I'm not an MD, I'm a virologist. I have a PhD, but I do not have a medical degree in that regard. So obviously listen to what your doctor says. That I obviously can give you any feedback on what you might be hearing from practitioners, but ultimately they have the medical degrees and can make those decisions as well, and should be advising you in the event that you are ill, though I hope none of you are or become ill in this case. So I really wanted to just touch base very briefly on this and try to keep these videos short so that you guys can kind of get a little quick snapshot and move along. Obviously, if you have questions or specific things, please reach out and let me know. I'll be sure to try to research them if I don't know the answer, and just kind of talk about those potential subjects depending on your interests and desires of what you want to learn about. So I am an influenza virologist. I am not a coronavirus virologist. They are slightly different, but they are still RNA genome viruses compared to DNA. So RNA is a little bit different, obviously, when you're kind of keeping your viral genome conserved and spread and whatnot. So they are slightly different, so I might have to read up a little bit about more coronavirus if it gets really detailed, but I'm trying to keep this a little bit more public health related. For those of you in Georgia, today I think they updated that we have about 146 cases confirmed in Georgia, which I still think is probably significantly lower than what's actually happening. But what I really wanted to note here were that of those, 46% of those positive cases in Georgia came from the age range of 18 to 59. So almost half of our positive cases are those that are considered in the low risk group. And I want to also touch on that as a mention. I know there's been a lot of talk saying basically like if you're young and healthy, you'll be fine. And I really want to stress that that does not actually mean you will not be severely ill, that you will not necessarily wind up in the hospital, or that there's not the potential for long-lasting damage. A lot of cases you don't realize that you might recover from this, but if you have significant lung damage, you might have reduced lung capacity for the rest of your life. So for those of you who are 18 to 59 and think because it's supposed to be a mild infection, it's still okay to go out, please stop doing that. Not only are you spreading the virus, and data coming out of both Italy and South Korea, which have an extensive, significant more testing that's being done than what's been done in the United States, show that there's an extremely high rate of infection in that kind of 20 to 29-year-old group. However, very little symptoms. So basically, that's the group that's spreading it essentially everywhere. So although it looks like our elderly and senior populations here in Georgia are not as highly affected, at this time, I do think that will change over time, but the good news there is that we're at least, I think, being protective of that group. But the people who are really keeping this going are young people. So please try to limit your interactions and actually socially distance. If you don't have to do something, please don't go out and do it. You don't need to have coronavirus parties. Even though the limit is 10, that doesn't mean let's try to pack 10 people in an apartment. You guys should be able to be social over the internet. And there's lots of things you can do that you're not totally isolated, but you don't need to be coming in contact with a large group of people if you don't need to, or even a small group. Let's be reasonable about this, obviously. One thing I really wanted to touch on, and I was actually contacted by somebody who is a healthcare worker, and he had a question for me a little while ago about the potential for reinfection and seroconversion and what's actually happening in regards to that. And I want to just briefly kind of touch on what's kind of changed over the course of what came out of China and Wuhan in the initial infection from what I've seen. So in early January, there was a lot of reports coming out of China that there was evidence of reinfection. And I think so far it looks like the data is showing that that is potentially more about virus being able to be detected for a long period of time, and not necessarily that people are recovering entirely and then being exposed and reinfected again. So that's very good news. There was also talk that then because of that there was low seroconversion, and seroconversion means that when you've been exposed to it, you get an antibody response. And this is true for a vaccine as well, and that's lasting for a certain period of time. And when you're seroconverted, it means you potentially have enough antibodies in your blood that are circulating that if you were to be exposed again to the virus, your antibodies should be able to neutralize the virus and protect you. And so a lot of that conversation also was, if people are getting reinfected, are we not getting seroconversion? Subsequent data out of China and a lot of recovered patients, as well as some rhesus macaque studies, have shown that seroconversion is in fact happening. At this time, we don't know how long your antibodies will last. So this could be a 1 to 3 month antibody, kind of response. This could be 1 to 3 years. We really don't know. And that data is going to come out over time, and the longer that this goes on and the more studies that we're able to do. But the really good news is, one, reinfection doesn't seem to be something that's actually really happening at a high level, and two, people are seroconverting, which means that once you're infected, you should be protected at least for a little while. That again will also help us slow the transmission that's going on as well, so we don't essentially keep having a naive population. And obviously this all information can change, but from what I've been reading based out of other countries as well as our own, that does appear to be what's going on. And that's also very good news for vaccine trials that have started. That means that if we can produce a vaccine, we might actually have some good coverage here. It's just a matter of how fast can we get that out to the general public in a safe manner. And I also really want to touch on, people that keep hearing, and the reason reinfection was kind of discussed was because people were supposedly negative and then they popped up positive again. And there was he had sent me a link to basically a patient study where somebody had, essentially recovered, and then shortly thereafter they were positive again, and they were positive. And what you have to understand is that a lot of our tests are being done by PCR. And the way PCR works is that it kind of identifies a very specific sequence within the virus, and in this case, the RNA genome that shows infection. And it takes this little section and it amplifies it up, if it's there, enough so that we can say, hey, it's there. So when we see a negative result, and then another negative result and a positive result, it doesn't necessarily mean that infection is happening again. It just might simply be a sampling difference. So a lot of these are NP swabs and they go up into your nose. And that's going to be highly dependent on if you're kind of recovering and your viral shed, which doesn't mean it's necessarily infectious, but the shed of the virus that might still be going on in your body even after you've recovered might occasionally pick up something that might be enough to amplify it and get a positive result. So that leads me into my other comment about this, where a lot of people out of China initially were saying that there was evidence that this was showing up in people's waste and feces. Subsequently, though that information is in fact true, what's also been noted is that there hasn't been evidence of infectious virus that's been able to be recovered from people. And what this means is sometimes you can keep shedding parts of the virus, in this case like the RNA genome, and it can be amplified and detected by this PCR test, but it doesn't necessarily mean that because it's there, you're also still infectious. But that's why it's really important, because they don't know, and to really confirm it, you have to do additional tests that probably aren't being done. You'd have to do like a plaque assay, things that hospitals are definitely not doing. This is something that's going to be shown in research. And we don't really know, because some people might shed virus for a very long time. This is going to be very specific to you as a person. And because there's so much unknown, you basically have to assume that give it those 2 weeks once you've been ill to really recover, because we don't know how long people could be shedding infectious virus. Even though they might have evidence of, presence of the virus, it doesn't mean it's infectious, but we can't rule it out at this time either without additional studies. So keeping that in mind, obviously, if you're ill and you're recovered, something I know that Dr. Fauci also pointed out the other day was we don't know how long you will shed at this time. There has not been the research and the studies to get that information out. And so if you've recovered and you might feel fine, it does not necessarily mean you're not potentially able to spread the virus quite yet. Usually we kind of talk about how long after a fever has broken in the flu world. So usually after 24 hours that your fever's down, typically that's when people say you're not infectious anymore. But just with the kind of difference in this virus and how long of an incubation period and things like that, we can't confirm that that's the case here. So please, if you're not feeling well and you're recovered, continue to keep your distance for some time, because unless you're getting a test showing you're not infectious, feeling great does not necessarily mean you're not potentially still able to expose it. Just as before you feel crappy when you're sick, then it doesn't necessarily mean that you weren't able to spread it. As we see this long incubation time where people have been exposed for a very long period of time, and are sick and able to spread it prior to showing illness, the same can be true on the other side of that. So keep that in mind as well. I'm going to wrap it up for there today. Please contact me if you have any questions. I'll try to address a new subject tomorrow, or if any more developments come out. I might touch on kind of the reporting that's going on and the tests, basically talking about confirmed to presumptive positive and why some of these numbers are constantly changing, and they might disagree between states, federal, and different agencies as well. So please keep questions coming to me, and I'd be happy to keep providing answers to you guys. With that, please keep washing your hands and stay safe.